Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining OPHEA today for our Inquiry-Based Learning webinar. Today we will be sharing the Inquiry-Based Learning process and how it can be applied in health and physical education, both at an elementary and secondary level, as well as support resources available from OPHEA. Our presenter today is Heather Gardner. Heather is a health and physical educator with the Hamilton Wentworth District School Board and a curriculum consultant with OPHEA. Heather has developed over 40 resources for health and physical education and was involved in the development of OPHEA's Human Development and Sexual Health Lesson Plans. In addition, Heather has provided hundreds of professional learning opportunities for educators across Canada. Thank you for being here today, Heather.
Thanks, Kristen. So we'll get started. Here are the learning goals for our time together this afternoon. I'll give you a few minutes to read the learning goals that we've identified. As you can see, we'll be exploring inquiry-based learning process and the approach as well as practical examples of how this approach can be applied in health and physical education from grades 1 to 12. We'll also review OPHEA's resources available to support this learning and approach. So to start us off, I'd like to provide a quick overview of OPHEA for those who may be unfamiliar with the organization or the services that it offers. OPHEA is proud to be a provincial subject association for health and physical education and a leader in developing quality health and physical education curriculum implementation supports for educators, public health professionals, and community program leaders. OPHEA's extensive network across Ontario includes teachers, educational assistants, community coaches, recreational program leaders, program assistants, and parents. Health and phys ed is an essential aspect of student achievement and overall healthy development of children and youth, and OPHEA provides a variety of resources to support educators. As we'll discuss later in the webinar, OPHEA's Inquiry-Based Learning in Health and Physical Education Resource Guide has just launched. So before we get too far into the inquiry-based learning process, let's take a step back to truly understand what inquiry-based learning is. Jurisdictions from across the country and around the world are doing work in the area of inquiry-based learning. You might hear it called different names, such as problem-based learning. The definition on the screen is one you'll find in OPHEA's new guide for inquiry-based learning. Alberta Learning defines inquiry-based learning as a process where students are involved in their learning, formulating questions, investigating wildly, and then building a new understanding, meaning, and knowledge. That knowledge is new to the students and may be used to answer a question, to develop a solution, or to support a position or point of view. The knowledge is usually presented to others and may result in some sort of action. Please take a moment to read a few key concepts central to the inquiry-based learning approach in health and physical education. One key idea here is that inquiry-based learning isn't linear. As educators and learners, you may be going back and forth between components of the process. For example, after gathering information, students may go back and change or refine their original question. Also, they will learn to reflect not only at the end, but throughout the process. Students engaged in inquiry-based learning develop 21st century higher-order thinking skills, including analyzing, synthesizing, evaluating, and reflecting, and they become more independent and interested as they take responsibility for their own learning. As students pose their own questions, their curiosity is piqued, and as a result, they are more engaged in the learning process. Throughout the inquiry process, students also learn and practice collaboration and communication skills. Adapted from the Ontario Social Studies, History, Geography curriculum for grades 1 to 8 and the Canadian and World Studies curriculum for grades 9 to 12, a model we are presenting for using inquiry in health and physical education consists of 6 components. It can be applied to student learning across the health and physical education curriculum with both health and physical education. Inquiry as a process for student learning can be considered in 3 stages: launching, facilitating, and making sense of inquiry, with the components of the inquiry process included throughout each stage. As part of launching their inquiry, students formulate questions to explore and investigate their topic. Here, students will consider their topic or question. Educators facilitate the students' learning during the gather and organize component as students interpret and analyze what they've collected within the inquiry. Once students have collected appropriate information and evidence related to their question or questions, they can move forward to making sense of their evidence. They evaluate and draw conclusions, communicate what they've learned, and reflect on what, why, and how they have learned. Reflection is part of all stages and components of the inquiry process, helping to deepen the learning. While the stages are progressive, educators can enter the process at any stage and with any component so students can begin learning and practicing using their inquiry skills. In health and physical education, students have the opportunity to develop inquiry skills in all strands of the curriculum, including the living skills expectations. For example, the 2015 Health and Physical Education curriculum requires that critical thinking, such as questioning, predicting, analyzing, synthesizing, examining opinions, identifying values and issues, detecting bias, and distinguishing between alternatives, be integrated with learning in active living, movement competence, and healthy living. These critical thinking skills are the same skills needed to and used in inquiry-based learning. In health and physical education, students can use an inquiry-based learning approach when exploring different ways to send an object, analyzing and evaluating which game strategy is most effective to regain possession of the ball, or communicating a decision they will make about healthy eating. So what's your starting point? Consider your amount of experience and level of confidence with both health and physical education instruction and with inquiry. So what we'll do now is have you respond in the poll and just let us know, what is your starting point when we connect inquiry with health and physical education? Great, so you're simply selecting one of the bullet points there. And for anyone new who might have joined, if you could put your phone on mute by pressing *4. All right, so we can see everyone's starting place. And so we have some folks who are less experienced with health and phys ed and inquiry, some folks who are confident with phys ed, but less experience with inquiry. So as we make through our time together this afternoon, we will come back to a slide similar to this to check and see how we've moved our way along. So as we've already highlighted, the inquiry-based learning process is recursive, with educators entering and exiting the model at any of the 6 components. Throughout our webinar today, we'll examine the launch of an inquiry through this perspective of 2 sample educators. The first scenario on the left-hand side is an elementary educator who has a high level of experience in health and phys ed and a high level experience of inquiry. The second, our secondary educator, is high in their experience in health and phys ed and low in their experience with inquiry. So what might be their starting point for these 2 educators? Let's take a moment to reflect and respond in the chat. Where would you start if you were one of these 2 educators? So what do you think? Let us know in the chat, where might these educators start with relation to inquiry-based learning? All right, so we've got multiple attendees typing, which is great. So we'll take a few moments here to just see what people think. So where would you start? If you were teacher 1, high experience in health and phys ed and a high experience in inquiry, or if you were teacher 2, a high experience in health and phys ed but low experience in inquiry. So you keep typing away, and let's take a look at our responses here. So elementary. So based on their experience, their personal experience, through our scenarios, this specific teacher has decided to move through an inquiry from start to finish. So in relation to the graphic previously with the COGS available from OFIA's inquiry-based learning resource, they've decided to make their way through an inquiry from start to finish. Now, our secondary educator who is new to inquiry-based learning, based on their previous experiences, they've decided to look for a starting point to integrate little pieces of inquiry into what they're already doing in physical education. So in the upcoming set of slides, we'll be illustrating a model for inquiry that can be used for instruction in health and phys ed. All of the information and sample graphic organizers are taken from OFIA's new Guide to Inquiry-Based Learning and can be accessed on the OFIA website. So we do have some examples here. Perfect. So our guest signed in as guest has identified exactly the scenario we'll be taking a look at, which is little pieces at a time, one at a time, and the idea of the elementary going for a longer period of time. And I see Dave Inglis is suggesting that, again, Teacher 2 looks at a strategy that can support them in phys ed and in health and make their way through the process as they feel comfortable. Wonderful. So it sounds like we are right on track. So as we've heard, launching an inquiry can begin at any stage. As teachers, you can explore this approach to instruction as deeply as you feel comfortable with. We'll now take a look at launching an inquiry in health and phys ed and see what our sample educators might do at every stage. When getting ready to launch an inquiry, there is no right and no wrong. You can explore this approach as deeply as you feel comfortable with. Inquiry is an approach to learning. Educators may focus on the whole process or one or two components of inquiry. The educator decides the starting point and how much autonomy students are ready for with respect to each component of the inquiry, as well as ways to use inquiry with students. Educators can approach inquiry from multiple entry points, as illustrated on the slide. They may use a structured inquiry-based approach in which the educator guides students to practice just one component of the process. Example, the educator chooses the question, the resources, or the way to communicate findings with the student. They may use a guided approach to inquiry in which students have choice and more involvement in more than one component of the inquiry process at a time. Or finally, for maximum student autonomy, educators may use a full inquiry approach in which students participate in each component of the inquiry process with the educator providing feedback as students proceed through the components. As always, a differentiated approach is needed to support student learning. For example, to engage a student who demonstrates strong reading abilities, the educator may have that student choose their own websites to research. For students who struggle with organizing their thoughts, the educator can provide graphic organizers for them to use when gathering their evidence. We'll start off by examining formulating questions. Here, students formulate questions or make predictions about concepts, strategies, and or the relationships between topics or skills, and plan investigations to answer the questions as they take an active role in their learning. For students to develop the skills for asking or formulating questions, it is helpful for educators to model effective questioning techniques as part of their teaching practice on a regular basis. Think about what types of questions you ask during physical activity and health units. What types of questions would you ask in health and phys ed? Let's have you respond to this question in the chat. So thinking about the questions that you ask, what types of questions do you ask? And please respond in the chat. So I see a few folks typing. Thinking about health education, maybe you're generating questions that help students make connections across different health topics, questions that might reinforce key learning, questions that reflect the living skills. And let's see some examples, some of your examples up there. In phys ed, it's more questions about how to improve a skill. In health, about decision-making. So definitely we're seeing connections to movement competence, to the living skills. Dave is sharing questions that are open-ended, student-friendly language, which is great, required, looking at from different perspectives. For phys ed, we might also see questions related to reflecting on the living skills, questions that prompt their thinking about what they're learning and why, questions that help them make connections between the overall expectations. So you continue to chat, and let's take a look at some questions available from the inquiry guide of OFIA. So inquiry questions in health and phys ed may take a number of approaches which can be used with instruction in all parts of health and physical education. The following are criteria for effective questions. They're open-ended. They're thought-provoking and intellectually engaging. They call for higher order thinking. They point towards important, transferable ideas. They raise additional questions or spark further inquiry. They require support and justification, not just the answer. And they recur over time. That is, these questions can and should be revisited again and again. And this chart that you see on the screen is available from page 31 of OFIA's Inquiry-Based Learning Guide. So let's connect back to our two sample educators, our secondary teacher who is experienced with health and phys ed and wants to begin to integrate an inquiry-based learning approach within their phys ed program, might start with questioning, and while teaching a unit on invasion games, focus on offensive game strategy, and might use a tool like this one, See, Think, Wonder. Students could respond to a video of an offensive gameplay in lacrosse, identifying what they see, what they think, and what they're wondering about. Our elementary teacher who is experienced with inquiry might use the same tool, but in the health class, create a variety of stations containing popular snack food labels, which students will observe, make note of, before delving into learning about healthy choices for snacks using Canada's Food Guide as a reference. This activity will help students to formulate questions as they begin their inquiry about healthy eating. So once students have an inquiry question, they begin to gather and record evidence to ultimately answer the question using a variety of credible sources. Sources of information used to answer inquiry questions will vary depending on the context of the inquiry. For example, finding information about healthy eating or sexual health may involve using sources such as books, databases, and health nurses. Finding information about fitness levels, movement skills, concepts, and game strategies may require using data collection tools such as fitness assessments and various game experiences. To ensure students are using critical thinking skills and are not simply giving personal opinions, students need to collect current, relevant information and evidence from different perspectives from which they later draw their conclusions. So let's have you think for a moment, what is one word that best describes what this phase, the gather and organize phase, of inquiry could look like in both health and physical education? And we'll have you write that one word in the comment section. And then, as always, please feel free to respond to other participants' words and comments. Ooh, portfolio. Great one, a great tool to be able to help students gather and organize. Maybe a word like find, investigate, explore, discover, research, arrange, categorize, label, record, results. Here are some of those words. So all of these components are part of learning to gather and organize information. It involves skills that need to be taught intentionally in order to help students learn. In health and physical education, students gather and organize their thoughts and understanding in a variety of ways. Educators might support these unique ways of student learning by utilizing these considerations and tips identified right now on the slide. Educators should keep in mind that explicit teaching will be needed to help students learn how to use these different tools when gathering and organizing their thoughts. Let's connect back to our two sample educators. Our secondary teacher, again experienced in phys ed, looking for other ways to integrate inquiry approaches into their physical education program, might start with this graphic organizer as an exit card. And while teaching a net wall unit focusing on what movement principles are applied when serving a ball over a net, looking at how they could use more power, this exit card might be applicable. Our elementary teacher, who has some experience with inquiry, might use the same tool, but in the health class, where the entire class works together as a large group to connect learning back to the lesson learning goals of staying safe while on the school bus. So we'll move to our next cog in our inquiry process. Once students have collected information or evidence, they need to examine it for patterns and how the information connects to previous knowledge, relates to practice, and answers their inquiry questions. Students also need to decide whether they have collected sufficient quality information to help them make a decision, create a solution, complete a task, or set a goal. To assess the quality of their information, students also need to review their sources of information with respect to bias, currency, point of view, and accuracy. To support students in learning how to interpret and analyze information, educators may model the use of visuals using guided questions such as, are there other perspectives you may not have considered? There are also a number of templates in OFIA's Guide to Inquiry-Based Learning that could be used to help students learn to determine whether their sources are credible and reliable. So with regards to the interpret and analyze stage, we'll take a look back to our secondary teacher looking to integrate inquiry into their phys ed program. They might use a graphic organizer for students to use as a self-check for their sources throughout their learning. With this tool, students will reflect on the currency of the source, its reliability. They'll examine which perspectives are viewed, the relevance of the source, and if it is information that helps to actually answer their inquiry question. In the classroom, this same tool might be used as an introductory activity where students evaluate the currency and reliability of two outside sources. For example, Wikipedia versus a public health unit website. Here's another example of a graphic organizer that is in OFIA's Guide for Inquiry-Based Learning. Our elementary teacher, who has some experience with inquiry, might use a similar tool in the health class where students will have a conference with a peer and use the tool as a guide to assess their sources and share some next steps. After students have analyzed their sources of information, they next amalgamate their information and draw conclusions based on sound judgment about the evidence. To synthesize all their collected information, students combine and arrange data, eliminate information that isn't important, highlight new understandings. Students look at what the evidence tells them, determine the implications of the information, and make a logical, well-supported conclusion. This may include what impact it has on them, others, or the world around them. So how do our students or your students draw conclusions in health and physical education? Can you give us some examples by responding in the comments? So what does drawing conclusions look like in your health program or your phys ed program? Share with us in the chat. Right, so we see an example, making a decision about what game strategy to use. A great one for phys ed. Evaluating what they eat and comparing it to Canada's food guide. Presenting an idea followed by a decision about what strategy they find works best for them. So you continue to chat, respond to each other, and we'll continue to look at evaluating and drawing conclusions. So students use the information that they have gathered to take some action. For example, they may make a decision about what would be an effective offensive or defensive strategy in a certain game situation, or consider how the use of movement skills or game strategies impacts successful participation in gameplay. They could reflect on their achievement of their fitness goals and consider what impact their results and what their next steps are. Or they could articulate what should be considered when making a plan to take care of their sexual health and well-being. So connecting back to our sample educators, our secondary teacher experienced in phys ed and wanting to start inquiry-based approaches in their phys ed program might use this PMI plus minus interesting graphic organizer while focusing on the influence of physical activity on mental health. Students can work in small groups as they explain the impacts of physical activity on mental health. Our elementary teacher, who has some experience with inquiry, might use the same tool, also in a health class, as per their inquiry teaching goal, where individual students highlight the importance of standing up for themselves. And our next cog, in the communicate component of inquiry process, students go public with their learning and share their new understandings with others. Students can communicate their conclusions in various ways, including oral, written, graphic, and/or multimedia forms. So what are some different ways that you have your students communicate information to you, to their peers, or to an audience? Can you share your responses in the chat and, of course, respond to other participants? We see lots of attendees are typing, tweets and blogs, so using social media as a way to communicate with their bodies, movement sequences, and dance. In health and phys ed, certainly students do have a unique opportunity to communicate in a variety of ways, such as using their body. Orally presenting role play, written forms, reports, some really great ideas we're seeing. And of course, the upfront section of the curriculum is a great place to check out. There's a paragraph in there that talks about physical communication skills, talks about using their bodies to show what they know, reading body language in both physical education and health education contexts. And of course, communication skills is a key component of the living skills, with lots of opportunities to explicitly teach these skills across the curriculum. We got a few more ideas in the chat, so keep those ideas coming while we move on to explore this section a little deeper. So learning vocabulary is key to success for students to communicate what they have learned. Students need to learn to use both verbally, both vocabulary that is specific to health and physical education, and vocabulary that they may be familiar with and will be using with inquiry-based learning across the curriculum. Opportunities for students to practice and develop their communication skills can occur in various ways throughout the various components of the inquiry process, not only during the communication stage. For example, students can work in a group to brainstorm questions, can turn and talk to an elbow partner about a credible source, and participate in a knowledge-building circle, telling the class what they've discovered about using strategies during a game. If we connect back to our two sample educators, throughout the inquiry process, both the elementary and secondary students would benefit from the use of a word wall. As new words are explored, they can be added to the wall. Students can create their own definitions or search out definitions from a variety of sources. Inquiry-specific words are displayed here. However, health and phys ed content-specific words from the topic of instruction would be a great addition to this wall. Reflection is a core component of inquiry-based learning and is an important piece with all parts of the process. Students develop the ability to think critically about their own thought process through reflection. Reflection involves students developing the ability to articulate their thinking about what they have learned and also about themselves as inquirers. As a starting point, students might consider how they learn and what helps them learn best. At the end of a chunk of learning, students might consider how what they learned came to be transferred to new learning, or what they might do differently next time. What tools have you used to support student reflection in your health and/or phys ed program? share your ideas right now in the chat. We've got multiple attendees typing, which is great. So let's see what some of those reflection tools are. Self-assessments, journals, exit cards, reflections, some more personal journals. We had portfolio listed for previous comment. I bet that would work here. Assignment, prompting students to collect info from family members or other adults and reflecting on what they've heard. Right, so conferencing outside of the classroom. Students will learn to reflect on and evaluate their experiences in the process, thinking about what went well, what could have been done differently, and what should have been done. A few samples of what students could reflect on are located here on the slide. We'll take a moment here to allow you to read through the examples and think about how you have students reflect in your program or how you might with some of these ideas in the future. For our final time, let's connect back to our two sample educators. Throughout the inquiry process, both elementary and secondary students would benefit from using this reflection exit card either individually or in small groups. Students consider what they have learned, how the process worked or needed improvement, and where to go next. Connections to the living skills expectations from health and physical education can be clearly seen here with personal skills as students use self-awareness as well as adaptive management and coping skills. They may also be using interpersonal skills if working in small groups and as they reflect on collaborating with others. The content of their inquiry will be directly related to learning in movement competence, active living, or healthy living. Throughout the webinar, we've seen lots of tools available for both elementary and secondary teachers from OFIA. Let's take a closer look. OFIA's Inquiry-Based Learning and Health and Physical Education Guide has been developed to support educators with the implementation of the 2015 Health and Physical Education Curriculum, grades 1 to 8 and 9 to 12. It is intended to support educators in developing their understanding of inquiry-based learning, its application in health and physical education curriculum, and the benefits it provides students. This guide, which you can download from ofia.net/teaching-tools, is divided into 4 sections to support educators in exploring inquiry in health and physical education. Section 1 provides an overview of inquiry-based learning as it applies to health and phys ed. Section 2 provides an overview of assessment in inquiry-based learning and related implementation tools. Section 3 demonstrates how educators may apply an inquiry-based learning approach in health and phys ed with guidelines for educators to use as they consider different components of the inquiry framework. And Section 4 provides sample inquiry plans for both elementary and secondary health and phys ed, including related implementation tools. The Inquiry-Based Learning Guide not only includes tools to support the process, but also big picture planning. Here we see some tips for keeping an inquiry journal to collect student learning. A variety of other organizers also exist to support students in moving through the process in a way that works for them. So where are you now, and where will you go from here? Let's take a look back at our scale from the start of the webinar. Where do you see yourself now? So we'll wait a few moments for everyone to answer. Of course, the top one being less experience with health and phys ed and less experience with inquiry, and gaining more experience as we move down the poll. What we'll do now is move into a few questions. So if you have any questions, we will use the chat option. As you can see, the link to the resource has been provided there in the chat. So if you right-click on that link, you'll be able to open up the resource, which is available. And if you have any questions, let's see those questions in the chat. While some of those questions are being typed up, I will provide our contact information. So if you do have any questions after the webinar, please feel free to connect with us. Also following OFIA on Twitter and Facebook, connecting on social media. And in a few moments, we'll have the evaluation shared through the link. So we would appreciate any comments that you might have regarding the webinar, and we'll see what sort of questions might arise. So we'll stick around for questions. If you do, can take a moment to complete the evaluation tool, that would be great, and hopefully we will see you in Niagara Falls for our conference in the fall. Great, thanks Sharon. Thanks for that feedback and sharing your perspective from public health.